I know exactly who you are. You're very impressive, and I apologize. It's been a really long day. That is not an excuse. And I also want to tell you that I'm going next week to speak in Compton for the first time. We're having a real college conference at Compton College, which is really something. And in a minute, I think you all will know what I mean by real college. This is an honor, Lisa, even though I have to say I thought I was going to Half Moon Bay originally when I got the invitation. And I'm from the DC area, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm going home. That's cool. But I'm also excited to talk with you all about what I've been working on for the last, I guess, close to 15 years now. One way to think about it is the new economics of college. Another way to think about it is this concept that I've created called real college, #RealCollege. And I think it's important that we talk about it in this way because, frankly, college has become the place that America loves to hate. I mean, if you really think about it, it's really quite a moment in this country right now, and I don't think that this happened overnight. But in many, many ways, people don't feel good. Regular Americans don't feel good about college right now. But my argument is that one of the reasons they don't is that they have a really false image of what college is. And that's because, frankly, we can't shut up about Harvard. We just can't. Every time we talk to people, and especially to our own children, about what college will be like, we talk about these places. And let's think about media for a minute, right? When I think college, my earliest memories of college on TV, well, first, A Different World, okay, which is residential. And while they dealt with serious issues, right, they ultimately socialized and had a good time, and they had parents who really cared. And then there was Felicity, which is NYU, okay? And then, we had a moment where we saw community college, but it was a sitcom. And now we have Grownish, which is something, and they certainly do get real from time to time, but ultimately, this is a young woman from a wealthy family, and we know she's going to be okay. This stands in sharp contrast to what's really going on in college, this thing that we've positioned as the only way out, the thing that we have actually fought to democratize access to for a very long time. So I want to talk about real college, what it means, what the new economics have done to this form of education that we say people should have, and then I want to talk about how to fix it, okay? Because ultimately, I'm going to take you pretty far down with me tonight. I promise. There might be tears, but I promise to also bring you back up. But first, I want to talk about this. Kids these days. Okay, I could have given you any number of slides. I used to have one that I pulled from Fox News that said, millennials too lazy to eat cereal. This is the depiction of the modern undergraduate, right? They're whiny, they're lazy, they're entitled. If they don't get good grades, it's because they don't care, they're not motivated enough, so let's make a performance-based scholarship. Let's dangle money in front of people and take it away if they can't get the grades right away, because it must tell us they don't really have skin in the game. That's the reason for student loans right now, by the way. They're actually, at this point, intended to be a source of motivation. That's how much people don't understand what's really going on with college students. We have to grapple with this, right? We can't ignore this. You especially can't ignore this because this is not just the perspective of somebody outside of education. This is the perspective of a lot of people working in higher education. You would not believe how many higher education administrators I meet. I mostly meet wonderful ones, okay? But from time to time, I meet folks who really think this. I'm not going to name names, although it would be fun if I did. There is a college president in the district, a college president I know fairly well, who doesn't believe me when I talk about food insecurity, which I will in a few minutes. He tells me that it's not food insecurity, it's food anxiety. And it's anxiety created by the fact that these status-conscious students are upset that they eat pizza instead of sushi. Okay? He thinks we need to create a cookbook of ramen noodle recipes. and have the students knock it down a couple notches in terms of their expectations as they enter school. If we don't consider how real that is and where those attitudes come from and what they mean, we're not going to be able to get past them. And we have to get past them. Because real students, and these are quotes from people, we have interviewed hundreds of students over the years, they talk about things like this. They talk about going to college to get a decent job and a decent life. They talk about going to college in order to give back. They talk about going to college to take care of their families. And by the way, some of them mean their parents, even when they're 18 years old. And others of them mean their children. Because we're actually at a kind of remarkable moment in history when 1 in 4 of the nation's undergraduates has a child. And that's only counting the ones who officially have dependents. It doesn't count all the other students who have young children living in their homes who they're taking care of because their sister or brother cannot. It doesn't count the cousins on the couch. So we're at a moment where people are saying actively about, as college students, I'm not expecting to get rich from going to college. I'm not even expecting to get an amazing job. I'm just trying to be okay. And if that's the reality in light of these stereotypes and perceptions, we have a lot of work to do. So, as I've said, we've embraced this concept of real college because it has to be in opposition to something else, which is clearly sort of fake college. And the other term that we need to really think hard about is this term that's used so readily by so many, including the educators, which is kids. Those kids in college, those college kids. They're not kids anymore. Yes, we've worked hard to put some dual enrollment students, okay? I get that there's some high school students who are getting access to college now, and people say to me, well, those 16 and 17-year-olds are definitely kids. I'm not sure anymore, frankly. I'm actually worried we took the kid part away from a lot of teenagers who've been adultified from a very young age, right? I actually think that when we look at the millennials, what we're seeing is the austerity generation, who are fairly remarkable in that they came up at a time with far fewer supports than their parents enjoyed. But we have to revisit our language in order for this to shift. And if we're going to help these students get to graduation, we're going to have to get real about them. Now, I don't know if everybody in the room is aware of just how serious the dropout crisis is in higher education. It's not polite to call it dropout. We're supposed to call it non-completion. That's because, at least in theory, they're eventually going to come back. And I understand there's transfer. And I understand that some people take time off and later in their 30s they come back. But I got to tell you, for the ones who are not there anymore, they themselves say they dropped out. And the consequences of dropping out are way different than they used to be. So it's not a new thing to drop out of college. It's not a new thing to say that almost 50% of people who enter college don't get a degree. That number hasn't actually changed over time, which is, in one sense, a great, amazing achievement, because we've certainly sent more people to college than we have in the past who don't come with straight A's in high school. But there's a key difference between our dropouts today and our dropouts of the 1970s and even the 1980s. Does anybody know what it is? There you go, debt. Right. So you get to walk around having not finished college with a parting gift, this thing that you have to have lorded over you every single day till the guy starts calling and you start dodging the call. And it turns out it's those people who did not get all the way through college, who do not have tens of thousands of dollars of debt, but who instead have the kind of debt that wealthy people just say, what's the big deal? These are the people who are defaulting on those loans and seeing their economic credit histories ruined. So, how do we get here, and what does it really look like? My book, Paying the Price, lays out a theory about the new economics of college that I intentionally pushed way beyond the typical discussions. So the innovative idea about how to make college affordable in this country typically is to freeze tuition. Not to make it free, I'll get to that later, but to freeze tuition. So if only we could stop it from going up. Well, that's a problem in multiple ways. One of the reasons that's a problem is that tuition is a fraction of the total cost of attending college. And while community college tuition has gone up a lot, and it's gone up entirely, it's not even partially because of state disinvestment, it's gone up entirely because of state disinvestment. It's nonetheless only a small part of what students struggle to pay. So that matters. The other reason that freezing tuition is not actually making college affordable is that it's actually usually used as a mechanism to starve the institutions themselves. The only people who get to freeze the tuition are usually the governors or the legislators. And they usually do so in part to punish the institution. And here we don't have to look any further than my own personal favorite example, Scott Walker, the now former governor of Wisconsin. So nonetheless, though, the fact remains that no matter how you cut it, whether you look at the number before or after financial aid, college costs more than it ever has. Okay, and part of that is not tuition, it's things like rent. But the second issue, and one that we don't talk that much about, is that who has gone to college has changed, and the conditions of families of the people who go to college have changed. So we know perfectly well that if we go back to the last century, to the middle of the last century, the people who went to college were relatively advantaged people. And so the financial aid system was created at that time with the thought that only a handful of people who went to college would actually need financial aid. It was also created with the idea that most people who went to college came from two-parent families where both parents were employed, and if the student fell short in college, the parent would somehow figure it out. Well, fast forward. Not only has the number of people going to college increased dramatically, but we see a lot more families of today's college students falling short. And that includes the low-income folks who we talk a lot about. These are the ones who qualify for the Pell Grant. But I also want to point out that it also includes the middle class. There's this ALICE group. It's asset-limited, income-constrained, yet employed. Middle class. And these folks, if you look at their college affordability indicators, like their net price or their expected family contribution, these folks look today the way the Pell recipients looked in 1990. They are slip sliding. And so while we used to talk about, well, we still do, but we shouldn't, we talk about money that goes to the middle class as a giveaway, as something we really should avoid if we really care about affordability. The fact is that college is genuinely unaffordable for them too. It's just that they are too rich to get the Pell Grant, yet too poor to be able to really afford the prices. So that's a really important kind of second issue. The third issue is one that higher education pays very little attention to. I mean, do a poll of college presidents and ask how many of them actually understand the rules around cash assistance, right? Temporary aid to needy families. How many of them understand the Farm Bill and the debates over SNAP? They all need to. Because when college students fall short, they turn to things like food stamps, except they can't today like they once did, because those programs have changed, and they have changed in ways that disadvantage college students. That's a third issue. The next one has to do with work. So how many of you work during college or are working during college? Okay, virtually everybody. It's not new, right? People will say, well, kids these days, I worked my way through college, they should too. Well, guess what? They are. 75% of them are working, and I gotta tell you, the way I look at these numbers, I bet the actual employment rate would be higher if we were asking college students how many of them are searching for work and can't find it. I asked those questions in my studies, and I see enormous fractions of those students, particularly men, and particularly men of color. So we have a problem because they are working and yet they can't pay the bills. And that has everything to do with issues like the declining value of the minimum wage. The fight for 15 is a fight about college completion. That is a part of the discussion, and it needs to be a louder part. Because if you could make more on an hourly basis, you could work fewer hours in college and pay your bills. Another really important issue is the number of college students who are trying to get jobs but are competing with the third plus of Americans who didn't go to college at all. Now, those folks need the jobs as well, but they have one advantage, which is they have more flexible schedules. Our college students, when their course schedules change, go to their bosses and say, I can't work Thursdays anymore. And they're greeted with a boss who says, work Thursdays or you're out. So those students are much more disposable than they used to be before. The final issue is neglected almost entirely when we talk about college being unaffordable. We have under-resourced students in under-resourced institutions because the institutions of public education in this country, both K-12 and now higher education, have been systematically defunded. And it's been really hidden because in order to really see that, you have to know how to parse the numbers, and higher education budgets are difficult to parse. The total amount of money states are spending and the total amount of money that the federal government is spending has gone up. So you can't say we don't spend as much as we used to. We spend more than we used to. But on a per student basis, it's gone down. So the way to read those tea leaves is, as more Americans said, I need to go to college, and particularly as more Black and brown and poor Americans said, I'm going to college, states pulled back on the number of dollars they were willing to put in to subsidize that education. That right there, that passing of the buck, that's a huge reason as to why we are here right now. And it's the reason why when students, especially first-generation students, go in and say, I need help, they're often left with nothing. They face advisor-student ratios of 1 to 800 at many of the nation's community colleges. Okay, it's not much better at a place like Temple. Right? We're the only public university, the only place to get a bachelor's degree in the public sector in the entire city of Philadelphia, a place where child hunger rates keep rising. And yet our budget has been cut over and over and over. And there are no Michael Bloombergs coming for us. Okay, we have a half of $1 billion of an endowment at a place that is 30% Pell. And it's in North Philadelphia, right? So you can see why my students almost every day say, I can't get an appointment at the Writing Center. They're completely booked. They're booked for the next 2 weeks. And they don't allow you to book more than 2 weeks out. We're just full up. So that's what the new economics of college looks like. The other component, though, are the things that have been silenced. So take a look at this quote. This is a quote from an 18-year-old. He was at a public university, and we said, how's college going? What's going on in college? And what he discloses is that the number one challenge he's having in college is the trouble of paying his mom's bills. He expresses quite well the need to pay his mom's bills. The fact that he's in college at all is his mom's triumph. The fact that his younger brothers and sisters are still living at home, he needs to help keep those lights on, needs to keep the refrigerator running. But he's got to have some kind of money to do it. And the opportunity cost of being in college is you're not at work as much. So the big challenge that this man was facing, and that I'm finding so many people are facing, men and women, is that you're not supposed to talk about how you're using your financial aid to feed other people. It's actually antithetical to the calculation of expected family contribution. It is the contribution from the parents to the student. We find that it flows the other way and that it creates enormous distress for the student, not because helping mom feels bad, but because this is something you can't talk about at school. It's something that if you disclose it, you'll be told in not very kind terms, these are non-educational expenses and not what aid was meant for. This is really notable. This is a real problem because it stands in contrast to all scientific evidence gathered from around the world that the most effective way to do cash transfers to people without money is to do them in an unrestricted way. In other words, give people money and let them figure out what to do with it. It actually turns out that's not just sort of the moral or the just thing to do, it's the efficient thing to do, and it's the most impactful thing to do. But our financial aid system currently does the exact opposite. And that brings me to the Wu-Tang. Okay? So some of you who follow me on Twitter, I think I have disclosed that I have to admit I did not know Wu-Tang Clan when I began my research. It's now been a decade. You would not believe how often cream comes up, even now, when talking to people about what it's like to go through college without enough money to actually be there, right? For those of you who are not familiar with this experience, let me just put it this way. Cash ruling everything around you means it is like a constant drumbeat on your brain. And scientific evidence actually shows us that has consequences. So there are psychological and physiological effects of scarcity. When we see a student sleeping in our classrooms, or we see a student getting bad grades, many of us still think they need to get more motivated or read the material. Very few of us think, oh my goodness, that scarcity, that lack of money is literally sitting on them. And if we did realize that, we'd figure out that we could do something about it, right? That's the piece of that research that I like. I don't like the part where it sort of suggests that people without money are brain damaged, right? They're clearly not. What's going on here, though, is scarcity which is reversible. And I can tell you that firsthand because when I assist homeless college students to actually get a place to live, you have to give it some time to recover from trauma like that. I don't think they ever fully recover. But gradually, over time, their grades go up. And they begin to emerge as the talented and motivated and energetic people that they were and had the capability of being. But it is far too easy to miss all of that because higher education has for the longest time completely forgotten Maslow. Now, I think this is weird in so many ways, including that the K-12 system totally knows about Maslow, right? And I used to explain Maslow and who he was and this pyramid and everything until I really realized that there has not been a single audience in front of me in years that does not know this pyramid. So we all get it, right? We know you can't do the stuff at the top, and we all get that college stuff is at the top without the bottom being met. And yet I now find myself traveling the country trying to explain to people that other people need food to eat. And every time I do so, I do have to hear about this thing called ramen. We have a problem. We have a real problem in that it has become this sort of normative thing to eat crappy in college, to feel like you've run out. We've never asked ourselves, is this affecting how we do in school? But we can. The USDA gives us, frankly, kind of a crappy scale, but it's there. These are the kinds of questions. Okay, we ask the students the USDA 10-item scale. I used to do the 6, I do the 18 if they have kids. We ask these students these questions and they talk to us about the last 30 days. Okay, so it's agreement or disagreement with these statements in the last 30 days. And as you can see, if they are eating ramen, they're going to say I couldn't afford to eat balanced meals, and they might even say that they were worried, right, that they were going to run out of money or run out of food before they had more, I can't speak, worried whether my food would run out before I got money to buy more, okay? So they might say that. And if they did, and they said yes to those two things, they would get a score of 2. I think it's actually really important for you to notice that the score of 2 puts them up here, okay? We're not, in the numbers I'm about to show you, we're not calling that food insecurity. I could if I really wanted to push the envelope, because I can tell you that if you look at the grades of the students in this marginal category, they look pretty similar to the ones in this category. And it doesn't feel good to be in that marginal category. But because we have to be very serious people, and the USDA prefers that we only do food insecure for these, that's the numbers I'm going to show you in a minute. okay? So you can see they gotta have a lot of problems, and most of them, by the way, most of the students in college who are food insecure are in the very lowest category. And we have to talk about homelessness and housing insecurity. McKinney-Vento does not help higher education. We don't have a single point of contact for our homeless students, and we can't agree in higher education what homelessness looks like. Couch surfing, it's a very contested issue. Is couch surfing homelessness or not? Couch surfing, K-12 has come to understand, is absolutely homelessness. And it constitutes 50% of all youth homelessness in this country. But couch surfing sounds like fun when you apply it to an undergrad, right? They must have been staying with different people, not because they had nowhere to live, but because they were having a good time. So I'm using a very conservative measure right now of homelessness. The first set of things up here at the top, like you're having trouble with your rent, right? Or you've moved a bunch of times, or you're moving in with other people due to financial problems, or you're living in overcrowded conditions. We're going to call that housing insecurity. Okay, we're only going to call things homelessness for this purpose if you were thrown out or evicted, or you stayed in an abandoned building, or you slept in a car, right? The most common category for college students is not staying in a shelter. There's a couple reasons. One is they don't perceive them as safe, like a lot of other people. And the other reason is because they have rules for getting access to shelters that often eliminate that as an option for college students, including things like, you have to get in line at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to get a space in the shelter, and students are in class. So the most common one is not knowing where you're going to sleep for at least one night. And I've done a lot of interviews with those folks, and I'll just tell you that the short of it is they just don't sleep. These are the people who walk around the campus all night, who campus security sees. These are the people who ride the bus, right? They just don't sleep. So these issues are so muted in higher education that even though the federal government has been spending about $30 million a year, every year, collecting survey data on college students since the early 1970s, they have not bothered to ask a single question about these things. The FAFSA asks, but it only asks certain people, not all the students, and it asks it in a way that I don't think almost any student would feel comfortable replying. And after they reply, they have to prove it. It's a very strange process. It's a process of trying to get paperwork that if you were homeless in K-12 education, maybe you can get from your high school. Or if you're staying in a shelter, you might be able to get from them, but otherwise is very, very hard to obtain. So instead we do surveys. I have to go and beg college administrators to let us in to their databases where they have their email addresses and to send them a survey. Usually they won't let us into the database, so we just give them a link and we send the student a survey, and that means we can't do any sampling. We can't do any of the nice things you do to increase response rates. It's very hard to pay incentives, okay? We get low response rate surveys, but we've been doing them for years and all over the country, only at the places that will let us in. And I think the places that have the most trouble, frankly, are the most fearful of letting us in. So that's worth considering as you look at these numbers. So here's what we know. The biggest study that we did of community colleges, 33,000 students answered the survey. That was about 10 to 15% of the people who we sent it to. You should ask yourself, is that overrepresenting things or under? I tend to think that the homeless college students are not exactly jumping to answer my survey, which says nothing about food or housing up front and offers them absolutely no help and is delivered on a computer or a phone. Nonetheless, we find that over 50% of community college students have dealt with food insecurity in the last 30 days, and half of them have dealt with housing insecurity in the last year, and an estimated 14%, 12% on one survey, 14% on another, have dealt with homelessness. We further find these problems exist at the universities. Despite their claims that it couldn't happen here, I have yet to go to a university and do the survey and not find these problems. And the numbers are not that much lower. At my own institution, it's about a third of our students dealing with food insecurity and/or housing insecurity, and about 7% of our students were homeless in the last year. Nationally, we find 9%. We further find the sorts of disparities that mark our K-12 system, mark our social policies, social benefit systems. Okay, I hope you can at least sort of see the things here. What you can see, of course, is that these things vary, for example, by race, ethnicity, and they're intersectional with things like LGBT status. Okay, I want to note that there was a lot of controversy over this sort of statistic. A guy on the editorial board of USA Today decided to write about how our study had to be nonsense because of this statistic. His argument was it had to be nonsense because there's been no systematic attack in an effort to starve gay people. That's what he wrote. Well, sort of. No, the issue is not that, right? The issue is the FAFSA. The issue is the assumption made on the FAFSA that people have parental support. And what do we know about students who come out to their families and how they are more likely to be estranged? We find that these students walk around with this parental income counting against them for financial aid when they get no access to their parents' resources. So of course there are reasonable explanations that frankly mark a lot of trauma for these students. Here are a few more. All sorts of vulnerable populations. Even veterans, because today's GI Bill looks nothing like the GI Bill my grandfather went to college on. Most heartbreaking of all, those foster youth who we work so hard to get through school, who barely make it out of high school, who transition to college at very low rates. We're finding that about a quarter of them deal with homelessness during college. Some of that has to do with the college not even considering that when they close those residence halls, those students have nowhere to go. Other pieces of this have to do with those strained relationships with family, to their assumptions that they'll live at home during college only to find themselves out over the most minor conflict. We know from looking at the data that, however, not only are these students vulnerable, they are also incredibly strong. I have been astonished when we've done studies of their time use to see that homeless college students spend as much time on their academics as students who have their needs secured. They devote as much time to studying. They devote as much time to the classroom. And by the way, it's not because the other students spend no time. Despite the claims of academically adrift, today's college students are actually demonstrably very committed to their learning. They're also demonstrably pulled away from their learning by all the sorts of real college things I'm talking about. The thing that homeless college students really lack is the space to sleep. So with less sleeping time, they have a greater difficulty focusing in school, and we do see them get lower grades, and they do drop out at higher rates. But I'm going to put aside their academic performance for a minute because frankly, it's the least of my concerns right now. I think the biggest problem that we have is that the people who have gone to college yet found themselves broke because of the new economics have come to think that they are to blame. Time and time again, when I sit down to talk to them, the story they tell me is an individual narrative about how their bootstraps broke. Think about the consequences of that. How many of them feel that they're completely alone, they caused this problem, they see no end in sight. They speak about how college was a mistake, how they wish they'd never gone. That idea that they are so alone, that's being created by all of us who don't talk about this. It's being created by the administrators who don't speak about the numbers of their students who are affected. And it represents a real problem if you're trying to create change. When they come to understand that they are one of many, when they come to understand the systemic reasons why so many are ending up in this situation, I watch them turn into activists. And so that's why I think it's so important that we tackle this issue. It's not only about whether they get B's or C's, right? It's about their understanding of their place in this world and about what has happened to them and their motivation to change. And I believe we can change this. I believe we need those students, by the way. I don't want to just change this on their behalf. I want to change this with today's real college students. And I want to give you not a template. I don't believe in a new initiative that you can just take home, okay? We have way too many of those in education. I have no interest. I'm not going to write you a recipe and tell you that you can implement it in your school and it will work. I am going to tell you that there are some basic principles to doing this work that sound as simple as anything I've ever said in my life, but they're so different than what we currently do in higher education that they work because they represent a massive change. And the first one is this: students are humans first. It is, like I said, incredibly obvious. But we spend so much time thinking of college students as learners, meaning they're already equipped, they're already full, they're ready to learn, that we haven't ever thought about the conditions of their learning. We think about that at least somewhat in K-12. I mean, my kids' school teachers in Philadelphia public schools think first and foremost, did everybody get their milk this morning? Because she knows perfectly well there's no point in teaching if they didn't. Right? She thinks about their physical activity. She thinks about whether they've had a place to sleep. She may be frustrated as heck and not able to do everything she wants to do about it, but she knows these are things to attend to. Too many college professors literally don't even stop to think about it. Too many college administrators don't even think that the programming they need to put into place is necessary because they haven't thought about it. Second issue. Once we acknowledge that these are humans on our campuses, we can begin to commit to a very different culture. Right now, we have a culture of privilege. It is remarkable. It is not just gated institutions with low admissions rates that act as though it is a privilege to be on the campus. It includes some of our community colleges who will say, look, if you're in remediation, we need to fix the system. You shouldn't have shown up here. You were not ready. If we flip this on our head and say, look, these are the students we're going to have, and all evidence is that these are the students we're going to have, and we instead commit to a culture of caring that does not say, it is now your job, college professor, to dig into your pocket and fund the student out of your own dime, but it is your job to say something when you see something. We get a very different learning environment. Now, this is not a theory, okay? This is the reality that I've gotten to observe in a place where I never thought I would see it. I recently went to West Texas for the first time about 1.5 years ago. And I went there because I met a man on Twitter. So it starts with a bad story. I met a college president on Twitter who kept tweeting at me, yeah, right on, I know what you're talking about, we're doing that. And I thought to myself, with a really healthy dose of skepticism towards college administrators, that, man, he really wants me to retweet him and get him some press attention, but he's probably not really walking his talk. So I reached out to some colleagues and I said, do you think he's real? And they said, I do think he's real. And I said, okay, I'm going to get on a plane, I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to spend some real time, not only with him, but with his faculty and with the students, and going around the campus and asking questions of all sorts of people, which he said I could do. And lo and behold, Russell Lowry Hart and Amarillo College are for real. And they are for real in the panhandle of Texas. They are for real in a county that 75% voted for Trump. They've completely transformed that college from a place that was known as a junior college that was the feeder school to the four-year to a place that acknowledges that the economy locally will die. It will fall through the floor if they don't step up and take care of the needs, the educational needs of the people who need to be able to get credentials to work in the area, things that require usually vocational degrees or associate degrees. And he took this change to heart from top all the way to bottom. Okay, even his janitorial staff, even his faculty, even his VPs, everybody now has the responsibility to simply know where the resources are. And if they see a student who needs resources, to tell them about it. This is not all that difficult. It can go further and further. You can certainly change compensation based on this if you want to and you're in a non-unionized environment. But you can also, really alter pedagogy based on these sorts of principles. The third thing that we have to do is ask questions. And even if you're not in higher ed, I need you to ask questions. Ask why the college acts the way that they do. Ask why there's still a box on so many college applications that keep so many people out. Ask why. Ask why the meal plan is the way that it is. And then learn about the resources that are there that might surprise you. Ask if your local college has a campus food pantry. And if they don't at this point, that's pretty much unacceptable. Because there are over 700 colleges and universities in this country now with a food pantry, and it takes about 5 minutes to open one. It's not the solution. I want to be really clear. It is really far from the solution, but it's the first step. So asking those questions matters. The other thing that we come into contact with a lot is this accusation that's also been leveled at K-12 education, which is that to do this work means that the educational institution has turned into a social service agency. I'm not saying it's the college's job to solve poverty. I'm saying it's the college's job to figure out what helps their students get to graduation. And poverty is one of the things that's holding their students back. So it's more about ameliorating the conditions of poverty for the students while they're in school so that they can begin to make progress. We could do so much more. I mean, these are just a few examples. I've seen remarkable things. One of the programs I'm studying is in Tacoma, Washington, where the community college has partnered with the local housing authority, and homeless college students are now getting Section 8 housing vouchers so that they can have a place to live while they're in school. Another place I visited recently, the Family Scholar House in Louisville, Kentucky, where low-income moms live with their children in subsidized housing across the street from their university and co-located with high-quality childcare. The integration of these services matters, and the partnerships matter. In Houston, they've gone way past a food pantry. Instead, they're giving out food scholarships. Food scholarships are delivered to you at the start of term, before you get hungry. And it's a free way for you to have groceries every single week, regardless of whether or not you're food insecure at that moment, right? It's preventative. We can do those things. We can offer access to public benefits delivered by a campus staff member so that you can get that while in the midst of school. California is doing this in spades right now. They have entire fairs, even on the weekend, where people can come and sign up for public benefits, and they get free pizza, and they sounds like a party. And what they're doing, frankly, is going and drawing down on the dollars they already paid with their taxes and bringing them back in to increase college completion so as to propel the local economies. The argument that Russell Lowry Hart made in West Texas to his Republican friends on that one was, look, you can either help our students get food stamps while they're in college so they can eat and finish, or the Californians will get the food stamp money that you paid for and draw it down over in California, right? That turns out it works. Texas is now trying to help students get on food stamps. Okay, emergency aid funds. One of my absolute favorite sorts of programs. Cash, when you need it, delivered fast. Right now, a lot of these programs are really itty-bitty, and they try to recreate the FAFSA, requiring students to fill out lengthy forms and wait long periods while they're trying to get $200. We need to get these sort of right-sized. I also highly recommend, and I've been told by some that K-12 educators could consider doing this too, putting this information in places where students might see it regularly. The syllabus is not nearly as ignored as some might think. The syllabus is the place where they look for the attendance policy. The syllabus is the place where they look for the readings for the next week. And the syllabus can be the place where you alert them to what to do if they don't have the food or the housing. This is transformative, not because the syllabus gets longer or anything like that, and not even because the students find the resources, but it's transformative because the teachers who have to paste this into their syllabus begin to ask why. And we're noticing that when a faculty member realizes they have to put this in, it's because something's wrong. And then they begin to ask more questions about what they can do and what they need to do. And then their students, because of the last couple sentences, their students come to them and tell them the realities of their lives. And then they get even more energized to do something. They also become better teachers, frankly, because their students are now in conversation with them about the things that really matter. Another thing, and I think you can tell, I've said this several times, we have to talk differently. We have to share these sorts of numbers. They are still not known to so many people. We've written about this in the New York Times. We've written about this in the Washington Post. This morning, I got to record a session about campus food insecurity with Soledad O'Brien. This is great, but this is barely a first step. There's still no TV show that reflects real college. And most people go home at night and think about their kids' future and think about this thing they want to pay for that is so far from reality and so far out of reach that when they reach for it, their kids will fall short. At the end of the day, this is a fundamentally political issue. It's very important that you're in Washington. I'm so busy when I'm here, and part of it is because we do finally have some energy again. It got quiet for a while there. President Obama was working really hard on these issues. Well, the House of Representatives is now beginning to work hard on these issues again, and we're about to have a really historic moment. By the start of 2019, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, it used to be called the General Accountability Office. They wanted to make it sound harsher, so it's the Government Accountability Office now. Very important. The GAO is going to issue the first ever report on campus food insecurity, which represents their first acknowledgement that this is real. And it's going to underline everything I just told you. And it's going to make a set of recommendations. And it is going to be pushed out in states all over the country. So our hope is that, for example, we will begin to replicate what California Governor Jerry Brown did when he created the Hunger-Free College Campus Bill. It was a start. It was $7.5 million. This morning in New Jersey, the Assembly heard a bill for $1 million for the New Jersey public institutions. These institutions will address these problems in different ways, and that is fine. Because the real thing that we're trying to get started here is some attention to this issue. Higher education is not democratized by any stretch of the imagination at this moment. In fact, it's become a place where in some cases we are creating more inequality and blocking more opportunities than we are, in fact, creating new venues and roads ahead. That is incredibly depressing as a professor of higher education, and as a teacher, and as a mom, and as a citizen of this country. It is depressing as a human. But I really do believe that the inattention is the driver. And so the big idea is that we wake up and we talk about it. We tell each other about it, and we acknowledge how unacceptable it is. And then we do the common sense things that we need to do to feed our learners and ensure that they have a place to sleep at night. If you know students going through these challenges, we've got a place for them to tell their stories. At realcollege.org, there's a Voices for Change initiative. It is not only there for the students to voice stories of struggle, but it is also there for the students who want to voice their solutions. The student activists are leading this charge, and we're looking for more of them to tell us what they're working on. We think those voices need to be held up. Last thing, I'm very happy to say that after 5 years of running the Wisconsin Hope Lab, which we sunsetted in June, we were able to launch a new center. This is not a typical academic center that just does research to put into journal articles. I don't need to sit in front of any more homeless college students to write gated articles about them. Okay? We do research to figure out the policies and practices that need to be in place. We've hired the practitioners and the policy folks into our shop to work alongside us in crafting those things, and we've hired a communications team to try to change the narrative. And I hope you will all join us in that effort. Thank you so much for having me. Okay. Thank you. Okay, you don't have to stand up. It's funny. All right, we'll take some questions or have some conversation.
Yep, we have a mic right here. Anybody else?
Tell me what I missed. Yes, cool. Comments. I like comments. Polite or rude. I can take it.
All right. I dropped out of college.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody would have kind of gave me this kind of talk beforehand, that it was everything that I was going through, why it was kind of why I made that decision.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you're just saying, I was like,
I know.
Like that's it. Like that was it. Like I was working. I stayed in San Francisco. I had to get on BART from San Francisco all the way to San Leandro, and I was like working at In and Out, so I had to work like late hours. I would get off at 2 in the morning, have to figure out my way from either San Leandro to San Francisco or to Oakland to stay with my like girlfriend. It was like a whole like story. So I'm like listening to everything you say. I'm like, man, if I had a little bit more of what you're talking about, I probably would have.
So the question is, what do we do with that, right? Like, so, and I'm honestly asking, right? So one thing that I've done is I get a bunch of first-year students, right? In this Gen Ed course, it has a weird title. I did not make it. It's called Why Care About College? And I assign them my book, and my book is the only, and I know that sounds bad, but the proceeds from my book go to emergency aid, okay? So, but more importantly, it's like a little guide through these things, right? So on day 1, we start talking about financial aid and how it works. And by day 5, we're talking about employment and those challenges and the life and the logistics stuff. And they usually do get to this part and go, why didn't somebody tell me this even sooner? So should it be during orientation? Or should we back it up and tell them in high school? Okay, so this is my question. I gotta tell you, like, I've been in front of a few high school students scare me, okay? I'm really intimidated. I'm about to have a high schooler. But here's my biggest fear. If we tell them this stuff, are they not gonna go? I don't think the answer is for them not to go. I actually think this is kind of remarkable, right? Knowing even all that I know, I still think you need to go. And the reason I think you need to go is there's nothing else open to you in any real way without it. And the other reason is because this is not fundamentally about the economic wage return, right? This is fundamentally about having more time in your life to question, to think, to engage with other people. And people who go to college are healthier and happier and live longer, and they vote. Those are the reasons, right, why we should want them to go. So I'm really concerned there has to be a way to talk about this and not sugarcoat it, to get real about it without scaring them off. And the day that I find that formula, right, because you're also countering, think about the other narrative. Think about Michelle Obama. It's always good to think about Michelle Obama. I always feel good, right? There's only one thing she did that really got me. And I shook my head, and I'm still shaking my head. And it's the day that she started running these PSAs that said, do the FAFSA, it'll only take 20 minutes. You can reach higher. Nobody does the FAFSA in 20 minutes who's a real college student, right? Maybe she did, I don't know. But it doesn't help to set people up to feel stupid because it took more than 20 minutes. And it doesn't help to make people think it'll be 20 minutes when their mom is not going to give them her tax returns, right? And that's the real reality, right? So what did they just do here in Washington? Well, they did 2 things. First, this is the year they put the FAFSA on the smartphone. Oh. Yes, they did. Oh, yeah, you can. Do you really think this helps? The FAFSA's on the smartphone now. You have an app. There's an app for the FAFSA. Do you think you should be doing the FAFSA on an app? No. No. And by the way, talk about really missing what was necessary. The other thing they're doing, if you listen to Secretary DeVos, and so we're in the middle right now of the Federal Student Aid Conference. The big financial aid conference is happening as we speak. And she just went there to talk about the crisis of students borrowing too much money, not meaning bad debt, meaning they're taking too many of the loans more than they need. And I saw this one coming. No, she doesn't know how it works. But let me say this. I saw this coming, and now I know that we were waiting on Elizabeth Warren tonight. So I'm going to do something you wouldn't see me normally do. And I'm going to tell you why I have a problem with Elizabeth Warren. I have a problem with Elizabeth Warren because she beats up on the federal government for these loans. And the problem is that we cannot afford to have these loans disappear right now. You do not want them to lower the amount of money that students can borrow right now until they first make college affordable. You do not want them to transfer the responsibility for student loans from education to Treasury, because these are not regular financial products. These are educational policies. You would never make these loans if these were financial products, right? These are loans made without credit checks to the most vulnerable people because they'll never be financially secure if they can't go to college. If this transfers to Treasury, which they could easily do, they'll start putting all kinds of credit checks in it, and they'll do it because, well, we said we couldn't repay the debt. right? So they'll do it in this benevolent, paternalistic way. It's a very dangerous moment right now to attack the loans, even though what you really want to attack are those new economics. Yes.
Part of the problem with that is that most of the people who owe money
Yes.
are the baby boomers, not the millennials.
Yes.
People
That's
my
exactly.
age. I know, I still owe them.
You're owning it, huh? Well, and there's been a bunch of good reports. I mean, there are wonderful people doing really good work who are showing things like really older folks have a lot of debt too, right? I mean, this is a problem. I'm not saying debt is a good thing, believe me. And I'm not saying it's good debt, by the way, something else that some of my colleagues say. It's good debt because it's education debt, and that's good debt. No, I don't agree with that either. I'm just saying that attacking the loans at this moment where they could be taken from us, they were taken, by the way, from mostly African-American families under President Obama. Under President Obama, he put credit checks into place on the Parent Plus loans. And we saw African-American college enrollment in this country go down. He was pushed, and there was a reversal. But it wasn't a pretty moment.
First, I just want to say I love your anger and fired up by it, because when we stop being angry, it means
Yes.
we've accepted the status quo and it's not good enough.
Yes, I agree.
I believe in data. I used to be a community college administrator working in student services, and the federal government, through the iPads data system, only tracked first-time, full-time students. And anybody that works in community college and in the higher ed space know that is almost a minority of students at this point. And so I'm not in that space anymore. Have they changed who they're tracking, who they're capturing data on?
They have, and it's been interesting. It was a long fight, and they are now finally paying attention to the part-time students and the ones who weren't first-time in college. The FTICs, right? It's amazing. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. You know, when you look at the other ones, those completion rates go up. Though when you look at the full picture, and if you follow this education wonk, Kevin Carey, if you follow his trajectory, he wrote in the New York Times many years ago about how lousy community colleges were, and when this data came out, he wrote about how great community colleges were. It was like, well, some of us knew you were using lousy data the entire time. Yeah, the data matter, and the silence on these issues of the data matter. So we're waiting for 2020 to come around when apparently for the first time the federal government is going to assess food and housing insecurity of those students. They're currently debating how many questions they can spare. They're going to give us one question, I think, for homelessness. There's no good way to assess homelessness in a single question, but we're working on it. Yes.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I just want to put the perspective of the foreign student.
Yes.
I came to this country in 1990 on a scholarship for American University. It was very expensive, so I transferred to Montgomery College and did the transfer track and went to University of Maryland. I didn't finish, 90 credit into it. This is a 30-year journey. So on my way to the journey, I found Carlos Rosario's public charter school. And they have a bilingual program for, if you speak a second language, you can become a teacher assistant. Well, my professional life is Swedish linguistic. So my thought was, oh, this is an adult public charter school. It says bilingual, I'm interested. And I found a wealth of information that supports me to get back on track. In the district, there's a lot of back on track, but when you're a foreign student in this era, it makes it a whole lot difficult to get back on track. And now through the school, after you do 2 semesters, you can go into a scholarship mode. So that's one of my first steps of success. I've been accepted, I'm in the process of going to Catholic University, where one word changed the direction of my life, which was called interdisciplinary studies. And they are accepting my body of work that I do as a linguist to help me to do a bachelor's degree and roll out into a master's program, but I'm still a foreign student. So I had to go back and finish a high school diploma to attach to my master's degree application, because my Swedish high school diploma would make me a foreign student and create more barriers for me. Long story short, it's 30 years. Housing, food security, etc., is not my issue. Immigration is my issue.
Yep.
And they've made it a whole lot harder when you trip up on one little piece of information, timeline, deadline, etc., etc., etc. So I just want to add a new dimension to this
Absolutely.
conversation.
You're adding a
and
very
the
important
population
dimension.
that
I'm
is
really
trying
glad
to
you
go to
did.
college and do the right thing.
I'm really glad you did. You actually did a couple of things there. One of the things you
Thank
talked
you.
about is about the trajectory and how long the trajectory can be and what it is to come back to school. There is an organization called the Graduate Network, that's about going and finding people who've left or who are out there working and helping them transition back in. It is very difficult. Colleges are not always willing to accept those credits or to help you back in. The other thing I want to tell you is that the Hope Center has decided that there's a set of issues that are all interlocking, right, which we plan to work on. And one of those issues is immigration. I also want to tell you that we know better than to say that we know enough to deal with this right now, right? This is a really difficult set of thorny issues. What we're going to be looking to do is to find people who really understand it and bring it into the team. The first one that we've bitten off in that area, though, first are returning citizens. Right? Because this is another massive issue. And as somebody who has spent 20 years going, where are all the African American males in my studies? Right? Because they're in society and they're not in my studies because they're not in college. That's the first place that we're going. But this is the second place, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think that we are creating another huge problem in how many people we're bringing over from other countries to go to school here so we can charge them a lot of money. And they're falling short every single day.
And can I put just a few plugs out there?
Okay.
Patricia from College Rosario is in my class, and Daniel is in my class. Another student left earlier. And the entire College Rosario support team.
Awesome.
This is really plugging it, but the financial aid lady is here, and she helps us a lot. The program lady is here. She helps us with transportation and all the cars that we need to get to school.
That's awesome.
The case manager is over there. I'm really plugging this thing. So a lot of the issues that you address in this hour-long presentation, College Rosario has really absorbed it, and they support us as students to do what we need to do to go to college.
Real colleges. Yeah.
Thank you, College Rosario.
Last one. Yep.
I'm gonna try to condense this, but I'm representing that population of people who are post-incarceration. So I was arrested for making a horrible choice when I was 16 years old, and I served 7 years. So from 16 to 23 years old, I was incarcerated. So I had to fight real hard, and during that incarceration, there was a lot of things I was able to do successfully as far as getting my GED. I became a tutor. I began to work with Spanish guys to learn basic English. So I was able to step inside in the prison environment, education world, and get some credentials. But I come out in 2016, and it's like, all right, you got a lot of qualities and good stuff, but all you got is your GED. So I go and I enroll in school, and I'm already working on my job, employment. And I was able to meet the Holistic Life Foundation, and things are moving fast because, all right, I'm in training, I'm about to start working, so I wasn't really stressing about employment. And I signed up for school, and it's like, all right, prove your 2015 income stuff.
Yeah, right.
So it's like, I didn't make no money. I'm like, well, how do you make no money? Well, I was incarcerated.
Right.
So, they make me print out the charges, and this is what's to prove that's how I'm incarcerated. So I'm trying to come as a fresh student, and it's like, oh, let's look at your crime. And I don't know why that's relevant, but it's relevant. Had no idea about FAFSA. So it's like, all right, I'm trying to get my time in with my work, not conflicting with my school schedule. So I just picked 2 classes. And I come from an urban setting, so a lot of people use FAFSA just to get money. So I'm thinking I'm gonna get this big check. And I'm going in school, and everything is going good. I only got 2 days out of the week. And I ended up getting a job at Metro PCS. So it was like, do I take this job to bring me more money because HLF is only demanding 1 hour out of my day, literally. And I still need to make more money. So I'm still going to school and I'm going to work. And then I got a serious work opportunity working in a hospital as a violence intervention worker that pays me decent money.
Yeah.
So long story short, I basically get a $17.64 check back. I was going to the store every day and getting snacks to eat. And so by the time the check came back, it was only a little bit left over. I bought a $187 book, and it was only like $400 something for FAFSA. So where I'm thinking I'm ready to get some type of check that everybody's talking about,
there.
I only signed up for 2 classes, so I didn't get a bigger check. And it's like, all right, I'm one of those people that say, forget college, I don't care about college. You know, you can still get a job anyway. But now I'm in my work environment, and it's like, all right, I want to make more money. But they'll do they'll do tuition reimbursement and everything. So it's like, I'm stuck at this point where my credit isn't bad, it's building. I refuse to put $20,000 unless for a 2018 Escalade or something like that. And it's like, how do I approach this thing where it's like, I'm not going to put a debt. I'm refusing. But I'm not eligible for a lot of stuff because I make some money now.
Right.
And so I just don't know what to do. I signed up for the online course stuff, but I realized like that's a setup because I'm needing some in school.
Yes,
So
you
I
need to
just
be in
really
school.
don't know
Yes.
where to go.
Look, the first thing I want to highlight is like, and I don't mean to trivialize it. I have thousands of you. Thousands. Do you hear how much complication? Do you hear all the complexity and the this and the that and the that? Somebody made this be this complicated. Wow. Okay? So I think that's really important. And that is I'm not full of specific advice, okay? I'm full of realize that this is the system trying to keep you from getting a college degree. And the system wins the day you give up, okay? We have to it's great to devote a coach and everything to every individual student, but we shouldn't have to coach them through such a complicated system, right? This thing needs to be streamlined in a lot of different ways, including that the incentives ought to be for you to be in school. You know what I mean? Because when you say you get that small check, it creates less incentive for you to be there versus to be at work. And in fact, the reason that you said, I might not be in school because I could work now, right, is the number one reason why people who have exited incarceration and do get connected to education do not stay. That's a problem we can fix. And so this is going to be the question. You have to keep talking about this. You have to keep pushing through, though, because you're more powerful with that degree. I cannot tell you how much power you have if you can actually get there. You will be one of so few who actually got it. You're allowed to have it take time. Don't let anybody tell you. I mean, you just heard. It can take a while. I don't think you want it to take 30 years, but when you get it, you will have more power for it. And please don't go to any school that you saw on television. Okay? Thank you so much.